On this episode of Still Loading, who knew dolphins had so many parts? Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, we are diving into Nintendo's first foray. I believe it's their first foray into the RTS or real-time strategy genre. I did last year, for those who remember, I did a series on the podcast on the history of RTS games, and I guess when I was researching it, I didn't really consider Pikmin to be an RTS, but it actually is. It definitely very much is. It's just not in the way you would expect it. But with me today to break down the first game in the Pikmin series is my buddy Veech from the YouTube channel Bite Size Pixel. Veech, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for setting aside some time. Always a pleasure having you on the show. Actually, I didn't even get to tell you our GameCube episode got a lot of I got a lot of positive reviews about that episode. People really liked it.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I never followed up with you about that after you had posted it or after we had filmed it because of your editing timing.
Yeah, I mean, I like this episode, like the episode we are recording right now, Pikmin, it's not going to be out for, at least like 3.5 weeks.
Oof.
Yeah, I mean, it's just how the scheduling goes. It's I record well in advance, so in case something falls through, I have time to get a backup going, which actually worked out.
Gotcha.
At the time of this recording, the most recent episode was My Life in Gaming, and that worked out because my original plan for that week's episode fell through, and I had recorded My Life in Gaming just 5 days beforehand as a just in case thing, and I needed it. So that's why I do stuff like this. Anyway, we're here to talk Pikmin. Now, I asked you on this episode, I asked you to guest on here because you're a huge Pikmin fan, correct?
Yeah, I've played all three so far, and though I've only beaten the first one. I've only fully played the first one.
That's all right, because the only one I've played at all is the first one. I was telling you I binged this game. I played straight through it. To start off with this, I wanted to talk about our individual experiences with the game, and I was going to go first, like I said, because mine is it's very recent and fresh in my memory. I asked you to do this episode. It's a series that I've always wanted to try and get into, so I figured now would be a good time, just because. And I'm like, well, let me finally, buckle down and play this. So we had actually already set the recording date. I'm like, I actually need to finish this, or just try it. I hadn't even played it yet. Binged it in a weekend. I loved it. I could not get enough of this game. I played it till like 1:00 in the morning a few nights. And
oh yeah,
I mean, dude, like working full time, trying to make content on the side, you don't stay up that late anymore unless you're like crazy or you have something else going on. So I stayed up till 1 a.m. a few nights because I was that hooked on it. I actually went to a friend's engagement party and then came home and finished it shortly thereafter. I loved it. It was so good. It's one of those games where when I wasn't playing it, I just wanted to go back home and continue playing it. And it's a very refreshing feeling to have about that, because I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to get that hooked on a game anymore. And when it does, when a game really sinks its teeth into you, it's actually kind of rewarding feeling. It's like, oh my gosh, it's been so long since I felt this attached to something, attached to a game. And Pikmin was that for me. I loved it. I loved this game from when I first played it. But what are your experiences with it?
Well, I was gonna say, like, the whole situation with how it's like harder to find a game that you can really dedicate a lot of time to. I think half of that battle is we have so many different platforms that are accessible to us that you can play so many different games. So like when I played this game, I was so the game came out like in 2001, I believe. And so I believe I was like 13, and that puts me like high school ish, right? 13.
13, because you graduate high school when you're 15, so you were probably in like maybe seventh or eighth grade, probably eighth.
Yeah, something like that. So I was in high school when this came out, and I remember going into it with almost no idea what it was, especially back then. And I was the same way. Like I remember playing it, and I played it every day, like after school, all the way through. I actually played through it twice.
Wow,
so I played
really?
through
Okay.
it. Yeah, like, and it was like back to back. I don't know, like if you want to, how like into the nitty gritty you want me to get into right now, but I remember enjoying this game so much that I played it once, and then immediately after I had finished it, I played it again.
No, by all means, get into the nitty gritty. If there's something you wanted to add to that, I don't
Well,
mind.
I kind of want to know about your experience with it first, and your resolution of the story before I kind of get into mine. You know what I mean? Like,
okay,
were you able to accomplish the goal, like the time limit and everything like that? Okay.
Well, let's break down what the actual objective is real quick for the listeners who may not have played Pikmin. Pikmin, basically the premise is you play as a guy named Olimar, Captain Olimar, captain of the Dolphin. Is it the SS Dolphin? I forget what the actual name of the ship is.
I believe it's the SS
it's the Dolphin. Okay, I wasn't sure if it's the SS Dolphin or not. Yes, it is the SS Dolphin. Olimar's spaceship, the SS Dolphin, gets hit by a comet, and he falls into an unknown planet that he's never been on before. Olimar finds out, I'm going to read this part directly from Wikipedia. He finds out that the planet's atmosphere contains high levels of poisonous oxygen, which I think is kind of funny. So could Olimar not live on planet Earth? You know, I know we don't have necessarily, like, our oxygen's mixed with nitrogen and other air types, but
they might not be carbon based. He might not be a carbon based life form.
That's interesting. So he crash lands on this planet, and his ship is in tatters. It's a wreck. So he has to search across this planet for the 30 different parts of his spaceship, and he only has 30 days to find all these parts before his life support systems give out, and he will just die. he can't he will not be able to breathe the air, and his life support systems will stop functioning. So he has 30 days to do it. Apparently you can successfully complete the game after collecting only 25 parts, but I
really?
maybe even you don't need all 30, but I believe there's like multiple endings, but I didn't get too many endings. But for my own playthrough, I did get all 30 parts. And we will go into kind of like where the Pikmin actually come into play with this, like what are the Pikmin and where they come into in terms of story. But for my playthrough and for the general premise, Olimar crash lands on the planet. He loses 30 parts to his ship. He has to find all 30 parts with the help of the Pikmin, and by getting all the 30 parts, you can then escape, and you only have 30 days to do it. And it's a hard time limit. Like, the days have a certain length of time. I don't know how many minutes it is exactly in real world time, but each day in Pikmin, quote unquote, is finite. So you do have a finite amount of time to collect 25 to 30 parts before the 30 days is up.
I think that's what was interesting about it. It almost like reminded me of the stress I felt when I heard about Majora's Mask initially when I was a kid. When they were
I could see that, yeah.
Like I remember being younger, and I loved Ocarina of Time, and then Majora's Mask, they were like, you only have 3 days, and like I had no idea what the mechanics were, so I was like, I remember just like feeling this amount of like stress and dread for that. And so at the same time, the time limit, I think the time limit with Pikmin is what made the game so enjoyable, because it puts you under this additional pressure to be efficient with your time and with the Pikmin.
100%, yeah.
Which is like, I guess, like in a way, like an interesting take on the real-time strategy.
Because apparently they get rid of that time limit in the second and third game, or at least the second. I don't know about the third. And
Well,
my friend who loves the first game said he didn't quite enjoy the second as much without that time limit, because it makes him lose his purpose for what he's doing.
You have less urgency in the second one without the time limit. And it's funny because I want to say a few months ago, I actually played the second one for the first time. I'd never bought it when it was available, and I purchased it a couple months ago. And I was playing it, and the gameplay, everything feels the same. But the removal of the time limit does allow you to return to zones and and kind of take things at a slower pace to like make less errors. But the third one, there is like a restriction. There's not a time limit restriction. It's a restriction on the amount of food supply that you can acquire. So every day your crew uses like food. Like you have like you like start off with X amount of food, and then you're at the end of the day they'll consume so much of it. And as you go through the game, you have to collect fruit, which gets turned into juice, which then will increase your food supply. But like if you have a really bad day, you don't get anything, then you're losing. So there is a bit of a challenge there, but it's not I would say the first Pikmin was the most intense with these restrictions.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But okay, so before we continue on, the whole idea you mentioned about getting hooked on a game, that it takes a while. And you're 100% right. We have so much choice now. It's almost it's almost impossible to choose when you have so much choice. It's like you having the ability to make so many decisions almost makes you afraid to make any decision.
Yeah, I mean it's that, but I think it's like it's a lot harder to because there's so many. Because especially nowadays, there's so much constantly coming out. It's hard to focus on one thing.
Yes.
Like I feel like I have my Switch collection is huge, and I've played a fraction of it. What I liked about this, and I think what had me hooked initially, is there's like so much visual. Like the game itself is so visually appealing, and the music really plays well with it. I mean, and you'll have to forgive me because it has been a very long time since I played this game. Wow. Like the stuff that really stands out to me was the ending of the game, because the first time I played it, I did not complete the ship. I ended up failing, and the cutscene at the end, when you lose, like Olimar dies. And then I don't know if I necessarily want to spoil it, but like it like stuck out to me, you know what I mean? Like in failing, and I was like, oh man, I felt like very disappointed, because I was like, I feel like there's no other Nintendo game where you have this defined like failure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like you always have enough lives in Mario, or I feel like Zelda is challenging enough, but not to the point where I've ever gotten a game over. You know what I mean? Because like you have all these safety nets, like you have the fairies and stuff like that in Zelda, and you always have these extra lives in Mario. And but with this game, like this is Nintendo's like hard line where it's like you either fail or you succeed.
There is a little bit of leniency with it, though. Like I would say the only other Nintendo game that has done something similar, and you already referenced it before, was Majora's Mask. Because if you don't understand, like if you just let it's a little bit more purposeful in Majora's, like to get the fail state, like you have to literally not do anything for the 3 days and then let the moon fall into Termina. And this, though, like it's a little bit more purposeful as well. Like if you want to fail, you just, you could literally start all 3 days and not collect a single thing and watch Olimar die. But what I was going to say was, the thing that's kind of forgiving about this is that if you think about it, you have 30 days to collect 30 parts. So your objective should be to get at least one part a day. And it's very possible. There was a couple times I got 2 parts a day. I collected all 30 parts, I think 2 days shy of the 30 days. I was on day 27 or 28. And what you can do though is that you save in between days. So so a lot of times what I would do is I would start up a day. I would explore, especially if I was on a new zone to explore. I would explore around, see what's available, see what my strategy should be, and then I would reset the day without saving. So I wouldn't actually go through. And then I would play through it with that intent and with that strategy in mind, and then I would go, through it.
And see, I think, I mean, that's a good strategy, and I think that's why when I first played it, especially when I was so young, I was like not thinking about it. And then, you have like a bad day, you have like a bad streak, and then you end up, depending on how you saved, like that run is completely washed. So that's why I played it. That's why I played it, and I lost on day 30, and then I replayed it all 30 days immediately afterwards. And all 30 days, the second time around, I ended up beating it, and I had a much better run because I was more familiar with the game. So the early days were more efficient, and B, I guess just I was more familiar with the game. So yeah, I mean, because like I was more familiar with it through that first playthrough, I was able to be more efficient. So in a way, I was kind of doing what you were doing, but I had to do it all in one shot the second time around.
I would argue you probably played just as much as I did in those 2 playthroughs as I did in the first, because there was a couple times I would reset days like 2 or 3 times, like sometimes even 4 times if I could. I think the only time that I looked up a handful of things. I think I ever looked up stuff like once or twice, because there was one thing when we talk about the final, like when you get the final piece 30, I'll explain what I had to look up what to do with it because I was just getting so frustrated. But that makes a lot more sense now. Why are you saying you played through the game twice? Now, before we dive into the game, are there any other memories you wanted to share about your early experiences with this?
I think it was I just think like how interesting it was seeing this like game back then, and how visually like very Nintendo. It was very bright and colorful, and unassuming. And then you get into it, and the horror of hearing Pikmin dying in combat,
getting like that, eaten by Bulbubs or whatever.
Yeah, like I had
Bulborbs,
and I've always like had this issue where I want to be the most efficient and lose the least amount of units in any game that I play. Mm-hmm. Like I always was very much like, I need to make sure no Pikmin dies. I can't leave any behind. I always have to be like positive Pikmin growth. And anytime I lost like 1 or 2, like, and there would be days where you would just lose a ton. And I was just like, oh my God, it would just devastate me because you just hear them dying. You're just like, oh no. Now that I'm older, I don't think it affects me as much as it did when I was a kid, but
it still affected me the first time I played it because I was getting so distraught, especially like there's nothing worse than leaving a Pikmin behind. And I know that sounds really cliche, like don't leave a man behind.
I've never seen that cutscene from playing the game, but I've actually
it's heartbreaking.
Because it's like running up. I've seen it on YouTube, and it's like running up to the onion, and it like trips or something like that. And then that's pretty sad.
So basically, listeners, we can use this to kind of get into the gameplay a little bit and some of the development history. Olimar, when he crash lands on this unknown planet, he discovers Pikmin, which are this weird plant hybrid humanoid-ish type of alien species. They're called Pikmin because they remind Olimar of the Pick brand of carrots on his home planet of Hakotate, or however you pronounce it. And these Pikmin will plant into the ground, and when they sprout, you can pluck them out of the ground, and you have to make sure that you need to be able to plant Pikmin in order to get more Pikmin, because this is an RTS. And it's a really interesting take on the RTS. I guess just for the sake of comparison, the standard, the stereotypical style of an RTS game is you start off with a base and 5 workers, or a certain number of workers depending on how the designers design the game. And then from there, those workers will then harvest resources, which then is used to build more workers, so you can build buildings that usually are like barracks or like other military production buildings. And then you expand, get another base, so you can build more workers to obtain more resources, and so on and so forth, until you can build up an army and go and attack whoever you're playing against, whether it's a computer or whether you're going head to head against a friend. That is, in a nutshell, what an RTS, in a standard RTS, is. Pikmin it's similar but also different at the same time. Like, it's a very different way of doing it. So in standard RTSs, you would get 5 workers, you tell them to go mine some minerals or go get some wood or go get some type of resource or food, and then once they harvest whatever that resource is, you use that resource to build more workers, so that way you can get more to go out and harvest it. In Pikmin, it's interesting because there are a number of ways for you to get more Pikmin. And Pikmin, instead of being, unlike other RTSs where workers and military units are very different, Pikmin, it's all one and the same. They are both used for gathering resources as well as being used for attacking and also collecting Olimar's ship parts. And you have to strategize how you want to use them, because there's 3 different color Pikmin in the first game, and they each have different strengths and weaknesses. We will get into what those are in a moment, but what you basically have to do is, when you might start out with only a handful of Pikmin, so then you find some, they look like bottle caps, so they're actually called pellets, and you find these pellets, whether they're in flowers or whether they're after you take out enemies or whether it's an enemy itself. The Pikmin will then carry those pellets back to these things. Do you remember what the things are called that they spawn out of, that they live in?
The onion.
Are they just called onions?
Yeah, I think everybody just refers to them as the onions. I don't think they have like a formal name.
I thought they had an actual name. I just forget what they are called then. But they live in these, they look like onions. They're like helicopter onion type of things, and they land on the planet every morning the same time Olimar does, and that's where you can get the Pikmin from. But they bring back these pellets or like enemy bodies or whatnot, and they feed it to these onion things. It's going to bother me that I can't remember what they're actually called, but I can't find what, I can't find the terminology for it.
I'm reading on the Wikipedia, and it calls them onions.
Does it just call them onions? Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think because he himself refers to them as onions.
Okay, so yeah, there's a different color onion for each of the 3 different. There's a red onion, a yellow onion, and a blue onion for the red, yellow, and blue Pikmins. And as you feed the pellets and the enemy bodies and the corpses of your dead enemy, of your fallen enemies, to this thing, it shoots out a bunch of other sprouts, which then once they grow, which doesn't take very long once they've been planted in the ground, then you can pull them out, and then you've increased the size of your army. So Pikmin is interesting, where you do technically use workers to go out and harvest resources, but unlike standard RTSs where you can then stockpile those resources and spend them however you please, you have to either use them right away or they go away by the next day. Like, you have to make sure that you grab all the resources that you can, and you also have to make sure which resources you are collecting for which Pikmin, because if you use nothing but red Pikmin to collect resources, all you're going to do is get nothing but red Pikmin, and you do need a variety in order to beat the game. That's how kind of like the general gameplay in terms of collecting works. Do you have anything to add to that though, Veech?
No, you kind of hit it on the head. Everything as far as what a traditional RTS is streamlined in this. They trim a lot of the fat because your army you're supposed to be mobile, as opposed to like a normal RTS where you're playing different campaign maps. This is your total units are going with you from different maps to maps because of the overall story focused adventure, as opposed to building a base and collecting different resources. The combat is the resource in this game. So, I mean, I think it was. I think the gameplay itself and the way that Nintendo approached it was a really interesting take on the RTS series.
I 100% agree. That's a really one last thing to say about the gameplay without going into the details of strategy and all that other stuff, but just to finish up our general overview of how the game handles. Like we said, you get your Pikmin to go attack enemies or get pellets from flowers or wherever it may be. So that way you can take those resources, whether it's your enemy's corpses or other pellets or whatnot, and you can bring them back to the onions, put them into whichever onion you want. If you want yellow Pikmin, blue Pikmin, or red Pikmin, and you get more Pikmin that way. And then you need a lot of Pikmin in order to pick up all of Olimar's ship parts, because the way the game breaks up all the the way the game is broken up is into 4 different levels plus a 5th level for the final area, or the 5th and final area. And in each of those 4 main areas, there are multiple ship parts. There's like a intro, kind of like a basic beginners area. There's only like 1 or 2 there. I think only 2. And then in all the others, there's a lot, like it takes the other 26, because there's 2 in the first area, 26 split up over the next 3, and then finally the last part is in the final area where there's like a final boss. And you have to make sure you get enough Pikmin so they can haul back Olimar's ship parts. But that's also where some of the strategy is. They are vulnerable while they are walking back with the ship parts, so you have to make sure you've either cleared their path, or you have to hope that you get lucky that they can outrun whatever might chase them.
And sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't know the way that they're going to path. Like, you might assume they're going to path a certain way, but because of the AI, they might be pathing in a completely different direction that you haven't even gone through yet.
Yeah, and that's also sometimes you have to be careful, and you have to follow along with them. So that way, if you're not certain of what their pathing is going to be, you have to follow along with them. So that way, if an enemy does attack them, you can tell them to be like, "Hey, stop carrying this ship part. Attack this guy to make sure you can defend yourself, and then go back to carrying this ship part." Hopefully you have enough Pikmin to be able to still carry it afterwards. You don't lose too many. But the final thing I wanted to say on the game, not the final, but the last thing I wanted to say on just like the basic overview of the gameplay were the Pikmin color types. You don't get all 3 color types right off the bat. They get introduced to you as the game goes on. But red Pikmin are generally, I believe they can hit a little bit harder than the yellow ones. Yellow ones I think are a little bit weaker, but what yellow ones can do, they can be thrown farther, and they also can carry bombs. So there's these like rock bombs that you can pick up, and they can plant to destroy either barriers that you can travel, or you can throw them at enemies, which I never really liked, because I always ended up killing all of my own Pikmin in those explosions. I never really found much use for the bombs in combat. I found it a lot more useful in just for what they're intended for, just getting past different like rock walls and whatnot. And then the blue Pikmin can swim. They can actually breathe in water. If you were to walk Pikmin in any other spot into the water or whatnot, the yellow or red ones, they would drown unless you can get them out and kind of guide them out. Now, the red can do something else other than attack, and I feel so fucking dumb, Veech. Why? I didn't know until the last level that they were fire resistant.
Really?
No, and I'm sure they tell you. I am 99% certain Olimar tells you in one of his logs. But for some reason, and dude, there was moments where I would go through flame geysers and be like, why aren't those guys getting injured? I was so I'm like, I wonder if Pikmin are just resisting to fire. What's the point of these fire geysers? Completely ignoring the fact they were all red. All of the ones that weren't getting hit by the fire. I felt
you know what I liked about the game though is like in situations like that, if you had made a mistake, like an environmental mistake, where like red Pikmin or yellow Pikmin ended up in water, or certain Pikmin were on fire, I believe you could call them back. You had like a very brief window where you could call them and you wouldn't lose them. It was a very, very small window. But wow, I'm surprised you didn't know that earlier, because like you go underground and you fight those like flamethrower like elephant.
I just thought they were missing. Yeah, no, I just thought they were missing. I just thought the elephants had bad aim. I had no clue. It was dude, I felt so dumb. I felt so dumb. Funny. Now, before we continue on with discussing more of the strategy and just kind of like the levels and how it all breaks down, I thought now that we kind of explained the basic gameplay, we've explained the basic premise of the game itself and gone through some of our own memories, some fun facts about the development of the game. The game changed a lot over the course of development. One of the earliest places you could see influence from was the Mario 128 tech demo back at Nintendo Space World. In the Mario 128 tech demo, it had 128 Marios all programmed with their own AI, and there was this 2D Mario made out of blocks, and the whole thing was these 128 3D Marios were picking up this 3D block, which when all put together looked like a 2D Mario sprite. And they're throwing it off the side of this like circular disc thing, and it's all wavy, and it was meant to show off the power of the GameCube. It showed how many things could be programmed with AI on the screen at once, combined with the physics of the blocks being thrown, combined with the physics of the disc thing that they were on. There was actually a funny YouTube comment, which, you know, just to be clear, listeners, this isn't true, but it made me laugh anyway. The YouTube comment I read when I was like researching this was, "I've come to realize every Nintendo game started off as a Mario tech demo," and there's so many games that started off as a tech demo for Mario. It just made me chuckle.
Well, I think what it is, I mean, I feel like Nintendo has all these ideas that they want to put into certain games, and then whether it be limitation or hardware limitation or time constraint limitation or something like that, they'll then take that idea and then shift it into its own thing. So I think that's like what I like about them is like they'll keep things that they believe are fun and enjoyable, and then
no good idea gets wasted.
Right.
Well, and you're 100% right, because if we go back to that Mario 128 demo, the way that the Mario, like the platform they were on kind of wiggled and moved around was kind of the basis of the inspiration for what ended up becoming Mario Galaxy. The idea of like these spherical worlds that you would be stuck to. So it's stuff like that. They really just don't throw out any ideas. And to go on with what I was saying, how like this early version of the game was so far removed from what the game would become. Like you can kind of see a little bit of the parallels, but, you know, 128 Marios on screen. You can have up to 100 Pikmin on screen at a time in this first game. Early versions of this wasn't going to be an RTS. It was going to be a godlike game, kind of in the same vein as like, think of like maybe The Sims meets... Oh, The Sims isn't a god game. Maybe it's more like Sim City.
Black and White.
Oh,
you ever play Black and... Yeah, have you ever played Black and White? That's literally a god game. Like you're literally a god in that game. Black and White, Populous. Stuff generally made by Peter Molyneux. I mean, that would have been cool too. That would have been interesting.
So, well, it was going to have a very biblical like vibe to it, which it's surprising for Nintendo because they stayed away from a lot of religious connotations or religious context. It was going to be a godlike game where a player would try to influence two human-like creatures, and they were called Adam and Eve. And the whole idea is that depending on how you influence them, whether you got them to fight each other or to breed and prosper, you could create this whole civilization or society. And you were supposed to kind of cultivate the society and see how large you could grow it. One of the only holdovers because it was a fictional world still. They weren't going to use actual humans. It was still going to be humanoid. One of the only holdovers that from it were the Bulborbs. The Bulborbs that we see in Pikmin were going to be mammoth-like creatures in this Adam and Eve game where they would periodically attack villages of these citizens that you created or whatnot. Which I thought, like, that's interesting that Nintendo was experimenting with a God game. That would have been so interesting to see Nintendo's take on a God game, you know?
Isn't that what what's that game? The one that came out on the GameCube, the giant Doshi or whatever.
Doshin the Giant.
Yeah, isn't that a God game too, or something like that?
I don't think so, but I've never played Doshin the Giant. I've
never played it, but it was very yeah. No, this is like a so Doshin the Giant. Doshin the Giant was not necessarily a God game, but from what I've seen from it, it's similar to the idea of what Black and White was. You have this avatar that represents, you know, your will, quote unquote.
That's interesting because it wasn't technically developed by Nintendo. It was developed by Param, but Param, I think it'd be Param is how you would say it. But Param was a game development company that worked. It wasn't acquired, but it's kind of like how the Pokemon company isn't owned by Nintendo, but they only really make games for Nintendo type of thing, where it's like it's like one of those things. They're like a second party company where they're not technically owned by the console or the publisher, but the only games they make for are published by that publisher. And the only thing I can see is they only ever had 2 games, and one was Doshin the Giant, and the other one is maybe also Doshin the Giant. I don't know. It was an expansion to the original. They made just one game. It seems like they were founded in '97 and defunct in May of 2003. So they didn't last very long.
That's a shame.
Yeah, but anyway, so I mean, I don't know. Would you count that as a Nintendo God game because it was published by Nintendo, but it was developed? It's like, do you count Pokemon as a Nintendo game? You know, I don't consider Pokemon Nintendo, even though
I think most people do. I think most people would. I think most people would associate Pokemon with Nintendo, A, because you can only play it exclusively on Nintendo platforms, but B, because Nintendo is co-owner of the Pokemon company.
That's I think it's fair like then. Yeah.
But even then, like, I think the company that made Doshin the Giant falls under the same category as the company that made Chibi Robo. Chibi Robo wasn't made by Nintendo, but Chibi Robo almost is like synonymous with Nintendo now because of Nintendo's involvement. It's a shame because I don't believe this ever got a US release.
I don't well, I mean, because the 64 disc drive never came out in the US, and yeah, I think you're right though. I think you could count Doshin the Giant because like I'm just looking at, like, I looked up Chibi Robo, and yeah, I mean, it's all stuff that's published by Nintendo, and it was only ever released for Nintendo. So it's one of those weird things where it's a second party developer, but at the same time it's kind of Nintendo anyway. It's still just Nintendo. That is interesting. Anyway, so I would be curious to see, like, an actual, like, I don't know, I haven't played Doshin the Giant, so I'd have to see, but I'd be curious to see, like, Nintendo's take on the God game in, like, a Pikmin, not necessarily style, but like something that truly feels like a Nintendo style game, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, I know what you're saying.
Some other fun facts about the development: Pikmin were originally going to be all black ant-like creatures. And the only way you would be able to tell the difference with them is that they were going to have different sizes. So depending on which type of Pikmin you were using, the size would be the only visual indicator, other than, I guess, obviously the look and feel of each Pikmin. But Miyamoto didn't like that because it was too bland. Essentially, he wanted to add color to it, from what I could read. He wanted to add color to it. So, and in all honesty, I think that was a smarter idea. I think having the colors to help to differentiate between them, it's a much better visual shorthand for being able to determine what you're looking at. Like, I think just looking at the different sizes of things, while effective, I don't think would have been as effective as the color thing ended up being. Do you agree?
Well, yeah, I mean, especially because they're primary colors. And,
yeah.
You know, so the primary colors, they're going to stand out more in the environments. And I think that it was a good way to avoid frustration for players because the mechanics of the game didn't really lend themselves too well to, like, very, like, high intense stressful situations, half the time you're just throwing Pikmin at enemies in a way where they're not immediately going to get damaged, So, but like you could cycle through Pikmin with, I believe, one of the triggers, right? Like as to like which Pikmin you were going to throw.
Oh, could you actually do that? I didn't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could.
Oh man, I was so bad with that. I did so poorly with that.
Because if they were just free form following you, they kind of were intermingled. But I believe if you cycled, they would like line up by color, and then you could like throw just your red or just your yellow.
There was a number of different things. They did a lot of smart things to basically circumvent the issue of not having a mouse for an RTS game. And I don't think Pikmin would necessarily work as a PC game. I think that it's really well designed as a console RTS. Because like you said, I completely forgot that. I'm pretty sure they even taught me that you can cycle through the colors by hitting like the triggers or the R and L's or whatever.
Whatever
what you can do though, so say you want to organize all the Pikmin together, it generally, whichever Pikmin you would throw next, it would show you the color of it at the bottom of the screen and on the HUD. So if you say you finally got to the color of Pikmin that you wanted, when you press and hold A to like charge up the throw, all the Pikmin in your squad that you currently have their attention will automatically sort by color, and the color that you have selected for throwing will be the next one behind you. So if you have like 5 reds, 5 blues, and 5 yellows, and you're about to throw a red, when you press and hold A, the next, after you throw that red that you picked up, the next 4 will also be red because they've all organized by color. You can also organize them by like when there's you hit X and it stops them all from following you. It kind of stops them in their place, and they'll automatically separate into their separate colors. So that way you can then be like, all right, I just want the yellows this time, or I just want the blues. You can play some Sneeches on the beaches with them, stars among Lars and whatnot. But you were saying that, without that visual shorthand, it probably would have been frustrating for the player.
Yeah.
And speaking of frustrations for the player, here are some other unused game ideas. They had the idea for a mechanic of having tired Pikmin. Like if certain like individual Pikmin could get exhausted, and you'd have to manage the different levels of exhaustion between each of the Pikmin.
Wow.
I don't think that was a smart thing to scrap. The only way that would have worked is if you didn't have to manage 100 at the same time.
That probably was more back when it was a traditional God sim.
Probably
not an RTS. I wouldn't see how that would even be possible as an RTS.
I mean, it's possible. It's just not fun because they have the other idea is they have health bars, and health bars on individual units have existed for a long time, like before this. So you could do the individual exhaustion meters, but why? Like that it seems unnecessary. It's an unnecessary complication to add to it. But the life bar was the other thing. And the last thing that I have written down, I'm sure there's others that I don't know about, but the last thing that I had written down was they were going to allow free will to the Pikmin. So some Pikmin just wouldn't listen to you at all. And they scrapped that kind of understandably, because how frustrating would that be? You're in the middle of the fight and the one Pikmin's like, nah, fuck that, bro, I'm not coming. You see that thing, that Bulbaborbs? It's fucking huge. I'm not going over there.
Like you just have like random Pikmin deserters.
Yeah, pretty much.
They just like run off like away from the group. I mean, that would be pretty funny. But I do think, I mean, my assumption would be is that was prior to the actual like RTS elements and more towards like this.
It's possible
this God sim type, because I mean, think about it. In every like city building game or God sim game, like the citizens are generally responsive to you. So it would have been interesting to have played a game like that where some of them are just like, nah, I don't believe in you. I don't. I'm going to do my own thing. But I mean that I think the free will thing would have actually been hilarious in Pikmin.
I think I would have been pretty funny. Now, so that's some of the unused mechanics. There's a bunch of stuff I found that I thought was interesting about how certain elements of the game were inspired. So, for example, the whistle that Olimar blows at the end of each day to bring the Pikmin back into their onions, that was inspired by some villages in rural Japan, where at the end of each day, some villages, like, they would play different melodies to signify like sunset is here, like, or to signal that it is currently, the sun is setting right now. It was also kind of thought that it's similar to a teacher rounding up students, and that idea of like a teacher blowing its whistle to say, hey, it's time to come in from recess or this and that, is a very universal type of thing that's not unique strictly to Japan. And I thought that was really cool.
Do you think the whole melody thing, the Japanese melody thing, do you think that is why we have melodies in Animal Crossing as well?
I have no idea. I never played the original Animal Crossing, but do you mean like the melodies for the different times of day?
Like the town? No. So like the town tune in Animal Crossing, like your town, you could set a tune, and each town can have its own unique tune to it.
Oh.
And whenever you would talk to a villager, the tune would play, or I don't know if it was like at the top of every hour the tune would play, but like you would hear it throughout the day. So I wonder if they pulled that from there as well.
I have no idea. It seems like it could be though. I'm gonna just try town tune inspiration. I'm gonna like just Google that, see if I can find anything. No, I mean, I just see a bunch of covers, like everyone's like their version of like a town tune,
right?
Them writing their own town tunes. But some other fun facts. The last notes I had about the development, and just some fun facts about the game, is the marketing campaigns, both outside of Japan and within Japan. Outside of Japan, I don't know if you knew this, Veech, they actually created a type of flower to market the game outside, like in the US. You can actually buy a Pikmin flower. I don't know if this is actually the official name, is Bokupa Cabana, or also known as the Pikmin flower, and it was bred to look like the flower that grows out of the Pikmin's heads.
Oh wow! I had no idea. I just looked it up. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, isn't that kind of cool?
Yeah.
Okay, so a Bacopa Cabana, yeah, commonly known as the Bacopa. This is the name of the flower. So that's kind of fucking cool, actually, that they actually, to market it, they bred a flower to look more like the flower from Pikmin. So listeners out there, if you want your own Pikmin flower, you can find it. You can just literally Google the Pikmin flower, and it will have like a really crazy Latin name that I'm not going to try to pronounce, commonly named as Bacopa or ornamental Bacopa. So yeah, check that out for what it's worth. In Japan, this I found super interesting. They created a song called Ai no Uta, and it was sung by an artist named Strawberry Flower, or like performed by an artist named Strawberry Flower. That song got released as a single, like on a single CD type of thing. It was actually more popular in Japan than the game was in Japan. That single sold over 600,000 copies, and the game only sold 500,000. And it stayed in the top 10 of Japan's music charts for a couple of weeks too. Like, it was an immensely popular song. I have not, at the time of this recording, I have not listened to it yet. I meant to listen to it, but I literally am looking on a YouTube page right now of the song. So after I'm done recording, I'm planning on listening to it just to hear what it is. But they do actually sing this song at different points of the game. If you like, there's a couple Easter eggs in the game that you can get the Pikmin to sing different songs, and they kind of repeat that. I think it started in Pikmin 2, actually, not in Pikmin 1. It started in Pikmin 2, where like if you have 20 of each Pikmin and you wait a little bit, they'll sing like a weird version of this song. Or maybe they play the Totaka's theme or something I forget exactly what it is. If you look up the Did You Know Gaming YouTube video, you'll actually see where I got a lot of my information, but also they reference that, and they go into the specific details of how in Pikmin 2 and 3 you can get them to sing songs, which is kind of cool. Yeah, so before we move on to the gameplay itself and just talking about the different levels and a bit of the story and like the endings and all that stuff, Veech, is there anything else you wanted to add? Any other things you wanted to comment on?
No. I'm ready. I'm ready to go.
All right. So let's dive right into this. Oh, well, let's dive. We're almost an hour into the recording session, but
yeah.
Well, so after some editing, it's not going to be almost an hour. With this game, we talked about the basics of the mechanics, and the basic mechanics, it's really effective. Like, I really was not expecting this game to control as well as it did for an RTS. The overall controls is that you throw Pikmin to attack enemies with them. You use the B button to call them over to you, and they'll follow you as long as they're called to you, or like, I guess they're at attention. I don't know how else you would really describe it. And you can tell to not be at attention, not follow you, and they'll just stand there and mind their own business. But you have to run around the level and see where all the different Olimar's ship parts are, which you can see on a mini map. But the challenge sometimes is figuring out how to get to all the different ship parts, because some parts require a little bit of strategy. You have to, some parts you can't even get to on some days because you need to either build bridges or break down walls, or all these different things that you can do with the Pikmin. Some Pikmin can just attack a wall and eventually break it down. Others will, like the yellow ones, will have to take bombs and then go break them down. But the bombs you have to be careful with, because if you dismiss your Pikmin while they're holding a bomb, they'll still hold it. But if you call them back with it, they'll drop the bomb and it'll activate. And if you're close by, it'll blow you up as well as a ton of your Pikmin. And that was incredibly aggravating. There was another time I tried to tell like 3 or 4 different bomb Pikmin to attack the final boss with bombs. It just created a giant explosion because they all went off at the same time. Even though I didn't see any timer countdown, they all went off at the same time. So, and I lost, I think, 50 Pikmin in those explosions.
Were you even able to do damage to the boss with the bombs? I don't recall. And you know what's funny? There was a video that I watched that was released yesterday from a YouTuber that I like that played through Pikmin 1 and beat the game in 22 days.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was talking about that strategy. He was talking about throwing the yellow Pikmin at the boss, but they wouldn't detonate. Like they just stood there holding the bomb.
Yeah, that's it's strange because when I first was fighting the final boss, I was getting so frustrated because I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. It doesn't feel like I can get anywhere with this thing. And I wanted to look up, like, am I missing something? Is there a strategy I should be doing? And they the strategy recommended using bombs, but I had the same issue that YouTuber did. They just did not work. And I will say this is an interesting idea for an RTS to have bosses where it kind of reminds me of like an MMO where it's a bunch of smaller, less powerful creatures going after, or not creatures, but like less powerful people going after one bigger and badder boss. And but unlike in RTS or MMOs where generally they have healers to help out with that, in this you just send wave after wave of your own Pikmin and hope that you survive.
Right.
It's pretty intense. What are some of your favorite bosses? Do you remember any of the bosses from this?
I'm trying to remember. I remember like the birds.
The birds were I know exactly. They blew the air, right? And they like shot your Pikmin everywhere.
No, those were
I didn't consider those bosses. That's what I thought you were talking about, though.
No, there were like ones that they would like stab at them. They would like come out of the ground. I'm pretty sure.
Oh yes, I know exactly the ones you're talking about. Those were so obnoxious.
That and the God, what was it? The
long legs, the daddy long legs.
No, the big worm that would just like roll over all your Pikmin.
I don't think I fought the big worm. I don't think I got that.
I mean, as long as I'm not confusing it for the second game, it might be in this. I hope it's not the second game. You know what? I apologize. That's from the second game.
Okay.
That's Empress Bubble. That's Empress Bull Blacks.
These names are amazing. You were referencing those birds though, which I forget which zone they were in, but you know what? I'll look up the Pikmin zones while I'm talking. But the way I finished that area, I don't know how the heck I did it, but I beat I guess, I don't know. So in that area, listeners, there are 3 birds that pop out of the ground and they kind of have like long necks, almost like emus, but they have like beaks like toucans, or they're very sharp and pointed and long, and they just kind of peck at the ground. And I believe this was in the Forest of Hope area.
It says,
if I remember correctly.
It says, yeah, no, you were right. It's Forest of Hope. There's 3 of them, and they drop the Geiger counter.
That's what it is. Yeah. What's crazy is there's 3 of them total. After I killed the one and I got the Geiger counter, I didn't know the others were going to pop out of the ground, and I literally just threw all the Pikmin I could on it, and they just were able to outrun them. They never got attacked.
Really?
I didn't even bother taking out the other 2 of these. They're called burrowing snagrets. I didn't even bother taking out the other 2. I was just like, well, I got the part. I don't really give a shit about these others, so let's just leave. And I didn't have to worry about it. And I thought that was kind of cool that you could actually do that in this game, where there was like, you didn't necessarily have to beat the game the way the game intended. Like if you could distract an enemy long enough, like there was times where like if I wanted my guys, if I had the ship part and there was going to be a bunch of enemies that would have been blocking my path, then I would go over with a smaller force, distract them while my dudes go by. I would only lose like 1 or 2, or I would run by them myself and like kind of distract them over to me. And then then they would just run by, I'd run away, and then never have to fight them again. So I kind of like that this game allows you a little bit of freedom in how you approach things, because you don't have to necessarily actually kill everything if you don't want to. I mean, you still have to kill enemies, because that's how you get more Pikmin, unless you want to painstakingly try to eat all the flowers, which they don't grow fast enough, I don't think.
Right, yeah.
What about some of your favorite, like which Pikmin color did you prefer? Did you prefer yellow, red, blue?
I preferred red, I feel, because usually when I would build my team, red would always be the more dominant number, because they were more of the workhorses. I feel like I only really brought blues and yellows out when I knew I needed to go through like environmental situations that required them. But the reds were really intended to be kind of the workhorse of
the fodder, the cannon fodder. You just throw wave after wave of them.
Yeah, the reds were definitely my favorite. It's not like I have an issue with the designs of the yellow and the blue ones. I don't like the ears on the yellow ones. I don't know
why. I'm gonna have to look at them now just to see. Oh, I could see why, because they kind of stick out to the side a little bit.
They're the only ones with ears. The blue ones are the only ones with a mouth. Like the red ones are the only ones that have a nose. Like they have like these like weird.
It's kind of adorable
features to kind of like make them like unique to themselves, but I don't know.
Wonder if the ears are why they can be thrown farther. They float a little bit more with those big ears of theirs. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
I'm not going to try to figure out the physics of Pikmin. That someone else can do that. The different areas that you play through to collect all of your parts, though, are the Impact Site, the Forest Hope, the Forest Navel, the Distant Spring, and then the Final Trial, which you don't need to play the Final Trial in order to beat the game. You only need to get 25 pieces in order to get the normal ending, which I don't even know do you know what the difference is between all the endings are?
I have no idea, because I got all 30 the second time I played through it.
I will look that up while we're speaking, because I got all 30 as well, so I don't know what they all are. According to the wiki, the good ending, if you get all 30 ship parts before day 30, you get to see the happy ending. You need to beat Emperor Bullbax and get the secret safe back to the SS Dolphin. After Olimar jumps, my page just moved. After Olimar jumps with joy, it turns nighttime. It's end of day. Olimar looks at the Pikmin while they tilt their heads in confusion. Then Olimar waves. Then the Pikmin tilt their head in the opposite direction. Olimar sighs. Then the SSS Dolphin sucks him in, and the ship begins to launch. And the Pikmin attack a red Bulborb that walks by. So that's actually funny, because Olimar in his journals, because in between each day, Olimar writes a journal about his experience so far, and he's got a very scientific approach to how he's handling it. He's very studious and trying to learn the behaviors of Pikmin. And one of the things he says is like, am I using them, or are they using me? Like, are they trying to like learn how to organize and become more efficient, so they're no longer the weak like creatures on the planet?
Yeah.
And then the end of this game, they all attack, like 5 of them, like a whole bunch of them jump on this red Bulborb, and I'm like, oh, I guess that's what's true. But continuing on with the good ending, Olimar flies away, and many unseen color onions come out of the distant planet. So that's when you can see the hints of the different colors that you get in later games. Then the credits are shown, followed by an enemy reel. The average ending, this will happen at the end of day 30. To get to this ending, the player must get a minimum of 25 ship parts, but not all 30. Olimar will walk to the SS Dolphin and take one glance at the Pikmin, leave in a hurry. One yellow, red, and blue Pikmin stare up in the sky, wondering if they will ever see Captain Olimar again. So they don't attack anybody. So in the good ending, you see a bunch. The average ending, you just see one of each, and they don't attack a red Bulborb. In the bad ending, you get this by not getting the 25 needed ship parts. This is the worst possible ending you can get. When the end of day 30 comes around, Olimar will realize that he cannot live on the planet any longer. He will try to take off with one of each type of Pikmin looking up at him. The ship will spin several times, and the main engine will explode, causing him to fall. The Pikmin find Olimar's unconscious / dead body and carry him to the Onion. This will produce Pikmar, a combination of Olimar and Pikmin. Wow.
Yeah.
Fucking crazy.
Yeah, so he ends up being planted in the ground, and like the little Pikmin like leaf pops up. Yeah, that was the first ending I got.
That's so crazy. He always stays in the ground. He can also be called Olamin. If you include him as a Pikmin as well as a mushroom Pikmin, there are 10 kinds of Pikmin. That's crazy. Real quick, we were talking before though how if you like just other types, just the idea of endings kind of made me think of this. When you're playing Pikmin, you're supposed to bring all your Pikmin back to the onions at the end of the day. We started talking about this before and I got sidetracked, but you're supposed to bring all the Pikmin back to the onions at the end of the day. And if you don't do that, or as long, it's not a huge deal if the Pikmin are buried in the ground, because sometimes there are some creatures that aren't hostile, but they'll pick up your Pikmin and then throw them in other places on the map, and they'll be buried in the ground there. So they'll be safe there, but you have essentially a Pikmin on the field that's counting towards your 100 pop cap that's doing nothing for you. So you want to get them, otherwise it's just eating up space on your pop cap. And it's frustrating. If a Pikmin is away from the onions by the time nightfall comes, and they're not buried in the ground, then what happens is you lose them. They're dead. They've been eaten by the creatures at night. But you see this happen as Olimar's ship flies away, because Olimar takes off at night and lands again in the morning. You see it trying to run after your ship, like, no, wait for me. And then it like either trips, or a creature will come in and just eat it, just chomp it up and just devour it right in front of you. Or you'll see it literally swarmed by like 6 of them, and it just disappears under the melee. It's heartbreaking, because you just left this little tiny defenseless Pikmin to get eaten by a mob of animals. And it's, it hurts my soul a little bit every time I lost. I think I ended up losing 5 or 6 total throughout the 30 years, which I was pretty happy with.
through the end of day event.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think I ever left one behind. I learned eventually, like, you can leave, like, if I knew I was coming back to that same map, I would just leave Pikmin buried.
Yeah.
By the onion landing points, so I wasn't wasting time picking them all up. And actually, if you had them in your party, you didn't have to get them all back into the onion. If they were just with you,
if they were just near the onions, yeah. And that was nice too, because then you didn't have to, like you said, you don't have to manually walk over to the onion, put all of them back in.
Yeah, you're not wasting time.
And at the beginning of the day, listeners, what you would do is that if you didn't have any Pikmin to pluck out of the ground, you would go over to whichever color onion that you wanted Pikmin from, red, yellow, or blue, and you would say how many you want to take out. So like by the end, I had over 200 red Pikmin. I had about 80 yellow and 80 blue. And I went through almost all of them fighting the final boss, which is, holy shit, what a tough boss it was. It took me 3 or 4 tries to beat.
You know what I liked about that too is, like, if you were further along in a map and you were like killing enemies and sending them back to the onions, depending on how long it took you to get back, the flower, the blooming state on those seeds would be different and they would be more powerful, so you wouldn't have to go and find the nectar to level them up.
You're right. We didn't even talk about that. The Pikmin can become more powerful, like you said, the blooming state. So when they're saplings or seedlings or whatever you want to call it, they just have a little leaf sprout on the top of their head that just kind of waggles in the wind. If you leave them in the ground long enough, that leaf will turn into a flower, and if it blooms, that's when a Pikmin is at its most powerful, when that flower is bloomed. And it also will let you take a hit too. Like sometimes a Pikmin won't die right away, but it'll lose all of its petals because it's a little more powerful. So not only does it act as more damage, it also acts as a way to, is almost like kind of like how Yoshi does in Super Mario World, where it like allows you to take an extra hit when you might not have been able to at one point in time, something like that. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much else to add to the gameplay to this. One thing I wanted to comment on that we didn't really talk about yet was the C-Stick. The C-Stick was interesting because it controlled how the Pikmin that you have like in your group. So like listeners, like I said, you can have 100 Pikmin on the field at once. You don't have to control all 100 at once, but if there's 100, you can only have a max up to 100. So you can control 50 at a time, and there might be 50 somewhere else, just either standing or in the ground, buried in the ground and not yet picked yet. But you can only have 100 total in the field, but you can control up to all 100 if you really want to. But however many Pikmin are in your control group that you're leading along, that are following you, when you use the C-Stick, it directs them to which side of Olimar should be on. So if like you hit up on the C-Stick, they will go up towards the top of the screen. If you hit down on the C-Stick, they will go down towards the bottom of the screen, left to left, right to right, or all the diagonals as well. And I love it because it's almost got like an infantry cavalry whistle. You hear
yeah,
this adorable little, like, I don't know it's almost like a bugle that's playing, but I don't know who's playing it. It doesn't seem like it's coming from Olimar.
Well, I think it's because he has, I mean, I don't know if it's necessary, but he has that whistle in his helmet all the time.
That could be maybe. It. I love that thing.
What I liked about that is, like, if you were fighting a lower threat enemy, you could just push up on the C-Stick and they would just all swarm the enemy and then just like immediately knock it out. So like most of the lower end like enemy fights, that's how I would do it. I would just push all the Pikmin forward. They would swarm him and then kill him, and then Pikmin would pick him up and then start to take him back to the onion.
Oh, that is so much smarter than what I was doing. I just threw all the time. Everything.
Oh, no, for the smaller guys, I usually did that. And it was like a good way. It was also like a good way for making sure like Pikmin were back far enough, depending on the enemy types. Like it was.
Or if you have to like navigate them along a narrow path or something.
Yeah. It gave you a little bit of control, considering the restrictions of the system or of the input, the controller.
Yeah, like what like the limitations of playing an RTS on a home console. Because like I've said before, RTS is generally considered a PC genre because of the amount of control you're able to get on a mouse and keyboard for it, between hotkeys and the accuracy of a mouse and all that other good stuff. I don't really have much else to add to this. Like, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about this first game that we have not gone into? Any subjects that you'd like to bring up? We haven't really talked too much about the visuals and music, though we have referenced them.
Yeah, I mean, as far as gameplay goes, I mean, like the gameplay is pretty straightforward. Like once you kind of get like a grasp on it, it's fairly straightforward as far as like how you're approaching enemies, the environments themselves. Like you don't really have like puzzle solving to this game. Like you had stated earlier, you're like building bridges and you're knocking down walls and you're blowing up barriers.
It's very light puzzle.
Yeah, there's like roadblocks early on only because you haven't unlocked all 3 Pikmin at the time. You know what I mean? But I feel like we've kind of touched on the gameplay completely, because like really it only comes down to like each enemy type being a little bit different on how you approach it. Like the armored cannon beetles, you know what I mean? You have to fight them from behind and stuff like that.
That actually reminded me of there's one thing that I had to look up. The other thing I looked up. So there's 2 times I looked stuff up in this game. One was the final boss, I just totally blanking on his name, but the Emperor, what's his face? Or hold on, I'll look
Emperor
it up.
Bulborb.
Emperor Bulborb. Emperor Bulblax. That's what it is. But that's what's even more interesting. It's Bulblax, like Blax. I feel like Bulbax is easier to say than Bulblax. Anyway, then the Emperor. I looked up for the Emperor. Also, are they called the cannon beetles? They're like the ones where they suck, like they shoot a rock out at you. They suck in a lot of air from the top, and then you see
they like ventilate through the back. Head.
Yeah, so you have to throw a Pikmin into its ventilation hole in the front, so that way it's forced to expose its weak side, like open up its shell, so that way it can ventilate. And that's when you throw all your Pikmin into, like, you just have them go wild and just attack there. So that was the only 2 times I had to look stuff up, because for some reason I did not even think it was an option to just throw a Pikmin into its spout. Like for some reason it just didn't occur to me. Once I understood that, it was smooth sailing. But I think I actually like that I'm annoyed that I had to look it up, because I know like Olimar says something like it has to suck in through the air. It has to suck in air through through its spout at the top. That might be the key to defeat it. Like, he's pretty clear, like, you have to do something with this. So I really wish I would have noticed that and just done something, because I think it was one of those things where, like, I didn't read as much as I should have with it, and I missed a lot of good gameplay information, like the red Pikmin are immune to fire, something that would have been incredibly helpful in some of the situations, so I didn't lose 50 Pikmin to flame geysers or something along those lines.
You know what's funny? Like how, like everything, like in the environments are super hostile towards the Pikmin, except for like the bread bugs, which are non-aggressive. They just drag items around, and then you just kill them for no reason. There's just fodder.
There's also a couple that aren't aggressive necessarily in terms of like they'll hurt you. Like tadpoles don't hurt you in the water. Also, there's these creatures that like, there's those. I referenced them before. I referenced both of these actually before. There's this flying creature that has these 2 long dangly arms that comes in and picks up Pikmin and throws them to random parts of the map.
Yeah,
or flies them over and then chucks them into the ground and plants them. And then there's another one where it's like this like wind elephant flying thing where it has like this long trunk and it will blow, and it blows all your Pikmin away, so you want to be careful with it. I like that there is enemies that weren't necessarily aggressive to attack you, but they were aggressive in the sense that they will disrupt your strategies. It wasn't necessarily that you had to find a way to defeat them and and you have to worry about them, killing a bunch of your Pikmin, but they would kill your Pikmin by accident. They might blow them into the water when you're not being careful, or if you're fighting at a bad spot. So you had to be smart about when you engaged them. And luckily, the guys that picked up your Pikmin and threw them in and planted them in random spots, they would not throw your guys into water unless they could be thrown into water. They wouldn't throw the red or yellow ones into the water, only the blue. Another thing, we totally didn't even bring this up. There's flowers you can throw your Pikmin into that will change their color, and that's used to get special it's used to. There's one part specifically that you need to do that. You have to bring a bunch of blue ones over through the water, throw them up to a platform where a yellow flower is, throw them into the yellow flower, take all those yellow guys, throw them over to this island that you want to get to, because the yellow guys can be thrown higher. So you had to turn just enough blue guys into yellow in order to throw them up to this ledge that you couldn't reach to bring down the item. Once you got Olimar's ship piece, you had to take control of those yellow guys again, switch them back over to blue so that way they could get back into the water and pick up the thing and bring it back. It was definitely a little tedious. That wasn't my favorite thing, but I like the idea, even if the way it was implemented wasn't my favorite.
Did you fight the optional boss?
Which one's the optional boss?
It's called the Smoky Prog.
I don't think I did.
I don't recall if I did or not, but it is it's like one of the hardest bosses in the game, apparently. You have to get to the distant spring before day 15 to be able to encounter it.
Oh.
Yeah.
I probably could have gotten to it. I just decided I took my time a lot of it. Like I could have gotten to the distant spring. I think I got to the distant spring by day 15, or before then, but I didn't want to necessarily, I didn't know about that. That's kind of cool. Finish what you were saying though.
Yeah, no, apparently like it's one of the hardest bosses, and for some reason it goes directly to the landing area. So it'll just sit there and camp your rocket, so if you're trying to do anything that day, it'll just destroy any Pikmin that come by.
What a dick.
Yeah.
What a dick. And the only way you can do it is if you take it out, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, you have to kill it, but apparently it's very difficult.
According to the wiki, there are several methods for defeating the Smoky Prog, some riskier than others. Swarming the Smoky Prog is utterly useless and will only result in all of your Pikmin perishing. One method is to withdraw 100 red Pikmin, wait until it uses its uprooting ability and becomes still, and then use the C-stick and A to throw Pikmin into its face as fast as possible. Precise aiming required so that Pikmin do not hit the onion instead of the prog. If done correctly, the Smoky Prog will be so distracted shaking off Pikmin that it will not be able to move and will eventually die. Another method is to bring out 10 to 12 reds at a time and continuously attack it until it's dead while avoiding its attacks. Naturally, this method takes longer, but may be less risky. And it also mentions stuff to do with the yellow one and blah, blah, blah. Apparently, interestingly enough, you can beat this game entirely with yellow Pikmin.
Really?
Yeah, it's hard. It's harder to do it, but you can beat this game with nothing but yellow Pikmin, which I find wild. Like, I don't want to know. I'm afraid to think about how much trial and error went into figuring that out.
I mean, that's interesting that someone would have done that challenge for themselves.
I mean, gamers do that all the time. I mean, if you think about it, like there's people who play the original Legend of Zelda without a sword. They never pick up the sword. They do swordless runs and stuff like that. So I think though we've talked about this enough. Like, believe it or not, there's more things that I could bring up just in terms of thinking about the strategy of like what you would do in some levels. But I feel like I would rather leave that off just because I feel like we've given a good enough overview of this game. I really feel like anyone who has not played this game kind of has an idea of like what it's like. If you like RTS games, it's truly worth trying out just because it is so different. But there is a lot to this game. There's a lot of strategy that you can use. Like there's so many different little subtle nods about like different bits of attention to detail and whatnot. I think the one thing that we didn't really touch too much on was just Olimar himself. Like this is a very dark game for a Nintendo game. Even if you take out that sad ending, the bad ending, it's a very dark game because they have, what is it? Like if you read Olimar's like ship logs, like some of the stuff that he talks about, like he talks about his family and how he may never see them again, and it's almost ominous, like the way he speaks. What do you think?
Yeah, it was kind of sad. Like he's always talking about his family and stuff and his kids. And I think that also gets like emphasized in the second game. It's a little bit more comical in the second game because the company that he works for is going out of business, which is why he comes back to Earth.
Or wherever this place is, yeah.
Well, I mean, no, it is supposed to be Earth.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's supposed to be Earth. It is interesting because it's like, you know, it's a contrast to the environment and the art style that Nintendo did with this. But I feel like that's like more common than people like to think, because like when you think of Nintendo games, like you think of the default stuff, like, you know, Super Mario or Pokemon, or Donkey Kong even. A lot of the other games like do have darker tones, you know, Zelda,
even Metroid. The new Kirby game kind of did too.
Yeah, a little bit. And like even like Metroid, it has like darker tones, you know, based off of like, you know, you're a bounty hunter and stuff like that. Like it's definitely interesting when Nintendo does this type of stuff.
Well, all right, Veech, I think that is a good place to leave off this episode. We've been going, we've talked so much detail about this game. For those who have not played this is my final thoughts. So we're going to go into final thoughts on the game. This is worth your time. This is a very fun strategy game. It's a bizarre combination of intense because of the time limit, but also not that intense because you can just reset the day. And even with that, the most you would lose is a little bit of time. Like I loved it. I was obsessed with it. I said it at the beginning of the episode, I could not put this game down, and I don't say that very often. A lot of times I'm more polite about a game, like, oh, it's fun or this or that. It's a really good game, but it's been so long since I found a game that I was hooked on, and I truly got hooked on this game. And it's 21 years old this year. Like it's not a new game by any stretch, but it still holds up. Like I really think the controls are still pretty good overall. I will say the camera is a little funky at times, but it was never too much that it ruined the game for me. There's a couple times it did frustrate me a decent amount, but it was never to the point where I would ever want to quit. It was still a really good game. So if you have not played Pikmin, the original one, eventually I'll do Pikmin 2 and 3, but at least for now, Pikmin 1, I highly recommend it. Veech, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, especially because new IPs from Nintendo are so few and far between.
Yeah.
Pikmin, I would say is definitely one that needs to be experienced as a Nintendo fan. And what's great is that you don't have to pay the ridiculous price of a GameCube game, because they did re-release it for the Wii. So if you can find a Wii copy and have a Wii or a Wii U, then you have options. You know what I mean? But I would say the whole series is great. The whole series itself is great, and it's like Miyamoto's like favorite series, I think, that he's done.
Really?
Yeah, he did. They did 3 or 4 shorts, like animated shorts of Pikmin.
Huh.
And he worked with Niantic with Pikmin Bloom, which I have a review on my channel.
I didn't get to see that. Spoiler alert, I guess, for it. Did you enjoy Pikmin Bloom?
No, I hated it.
Oh, Jesus. Well, we'll watch. For listeners, if you want to find out why Veech disliked it, you have to check out his YouTube channel, Bite Size Pixel.
There you go. Yeah, there we go. That's a good transition. But no, like Pikmin is like one of Miyamoto's like near and dear. Yeah, I think it's definitely worth picking up.
I am with you on that. I think that is a good place to leave off this episode. Veech, thank you so much for joining me, man. I had a lot of fun talking Pikmin with you. Where can the good people find you online?
You can always check out my YouTube channel, Bite Size Pixel. I have a Twitter at Bite Size Pixel and an Instagram, though I don't use them terribly often, but I am on them as well.
Social media is draining, to say the least.
Yeah.
It's fairly easy for me to stay up on social media, but it is still, I don't know. It can be there's this bizarre feeling of like you constantly need to post, and if it's not your favorite thing to do, it's so draining. I've had a bunch of people on recently who's just like, they don't like to do social media and it's a necessary evil. I like it to an extent, but it's unfortunate that it's frustrating. Anyway, as usual for me, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. After I just railed against social media, follow me there: Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Still Loading Pod on all of them. If you want to support the show, you can do that in a number of ways. You can give it a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use, because that helps more people find the show. If you want to support the show monetarily, you can do so by going to patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you'll get all the episodes a few days early and at a higher bit rate, as well as access to a patron exclusive Discord. But if funds are limited, don't give your money to me. Go to the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating to them. That will do it for this episode of Still Loading. Veech, once again, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, man. Always a fun time catching up and chatting. You know what I mean?
I love, dude, it's always a pleasure. You're very well spoken. I love being able to talk to you about I don't know who else I could have a conversation this in depth about Pikmin with, and I'm very happy that I got to have that with you. But that will do it for this episode, everyone. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time.